How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Interpreting the Stars. My name is Dave, and today I have a very special guest with me this evening. We have Philip Blattenberger. How's it going, man?
Very well, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are the writer-director of a little movie called Condor's Nest that's coming out on digital everywhere on January 27th, if I got that right. In your words, how would you describe your movie?
Oh man, so Condor's Nest is to be honest, it's a popcorn thriller. That's a term you can use. It's a Nazi ass kicking movie, right? It's set during the 1950s during a search for Nazi war criminals in South America. It's an absolute romp from start to finish. The movie opens up in Eastern France in 1944. A Nazi colonel played by Arnold Vosloo, the mummy villain, shows up and executes a bomber crew. And we've got a guy who's the lone survivor who goes back to South America 10 years later seeking revenge. It's a wild show.
Yeah, and honestly, I really enjoyed this movie, and I am not really an enjoyer of most war films. So for me, it
Sure.
was special. So first of all, congratulations on the movie. And I was looking you up a little bit, and I saw that you had this other movie called Point Man, right?
Mhm.
Also a war film, and that one, I believe, Vietnam.
Yep.
So my question is there something about war in particular that speaks to you and inspires you to tell your own kind of stories?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I'll be honest, I don't look at Point Man as a war movie. Point Man is a crime thriller, or a crime drama, more like it. Very dialogue heavy, set against the backdrop of a war. And
Right.
actually, similarly, I would put Condor's Nest in the same lake. Condor's Nest certainly has war elements. We see the opener of the movie set in 1944 in France. We see a crashed B-17 bomber and German soldiers at the beginning. But we very quickly jump past that into 1950s
Mhm.
South America, at which point it turns into sort of a turncoat, dramatic, almost political thriller in some ways, especially as you get towards the end of it. And so I think, war being, one of the most dramatic possible things that humans can experience, breeds dynamics that lead into very interesting arcs that, kind of play down the line. And so I think what we see in Condor's Nest is we're catching protagonist Will Spaulding and supporting actors who are really almost leads themselves. Corinne Briddy, who plays Lena Ron, the Mossad agent, and Al Pagano, who plays Albert Vogel, the German scientist. We're catching all of these folks. It sort of a downswing in their character arcs, at least in terms as it relates to the war, which are suddenly ticking back up into this drama of being in South America, and everybody with their sort of incumbent motivations and really kind of crossing motivations to go get what they need, which put them at odds with each other. So yeah, definitely war elements, which are fun, but I would not call them war movies.
I gotcha. Yeah, I can understand that, especially because this takes place, like you said, like 10 years after the fact, after the
Sure.
war. And that prompted me to really get interested because I wanted to know more about, what did happen, to Nazis after the war ended. Where did they just kind of
Sure.
all vanished off to? And they, run off to South America in this film, like you said, and
Mhm.
and that happened in real life, from what I understand. Like they did
Yep.
kind of venture off into South America.
Yeah.
The movie's called Condor's Nest, which is referring to a bunker source that they're all kind of hiding in South America. So is that like an invention of yours, or is that based off of anything that is real in South America?
Yeah, so definitely, there were historically something like 10,000 Nazis that fled Germany after the fall of the Third Reich, set up shop in various South American countries, and sort of tried to blend into the margins of society and hide. So yeah, that's based. That's a real thing. Now we have used that historical reality as a canvas upon which to sort of weave a narrative maybe that's a little less based. So the Condor's Nest obviously was not real. But we have sort of used that canvas to create a fictional Nazi fortress, which is it's a fortress physically, but it's also the locus of this political movement to create the Fourth Reich, this new Nazi empire in South America, which is sort of your third act plot that our protagonist Will Spaulding stumbles upon when he goes down to hunt down his Colonel Bach in an act of revenge. So yeah, we sure it's based. We have a historic reality of Nazis in South America, but we're using that as a fun tapestry, and we're weaving
Mhm.
into that our own very maybe a little historically irreverent, as you, I'm sure, having seen this, have noticed in a few plot points. But we're taking some fun liberties and just telling a really interesting what if story.
Sure. Yeah, as a writer director myself, a couple things that I like to know going in behind the scenes is there anything specifically shot wise, camera angle wise, that you tend to go after for certain scenes?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I mean, to be honest, I've never had any desire to reinvent the wheel. We shoot, as we did in Condors, we shoot pretty standard coverage. You got to have your wide shots for editing purposes. You got to have your mediums. You got to have a dirty frame. You got to have a close up. One thing that I had fun with on this is we wanted to play with power dynamics between Will and Lena, who are two characters who are constantly at odds. And so part of the shot design was making sure that we got, and this is, one of the things that I thought was a really fun dynamic to help accentuate the idea of this shifting pendulum between the two. So Lena starts out with the power, and then it shifts over to Will as he gets the drop, but then it shifts back as Lena steps in, and it's constantly going back and forth throughout the movie. So if you pay real close attention, you'll notice that if you have a shot, of Will where he's got the power or the upper hand, those shots of Lena will often have Will's shoulder sort of in the corner of it, as though his presence is there, right? There's nothing innovative about this, but it helps add to the storytelling. But when Lena has the power, if we're showing Lena, it's a clean shot, right? All you see is Lena. But then if we're looking at Will when Lena has the power, you've got Lena who's present in the corner of the frame. Again, nothing innovative, but it was a fun way to help tell the story and accentuate the idea of what are often very subtle shifts in power throughout this thing. So if I had to pick a framing device, if you will, cinematically, that was one of them, and it was a lot of fun to play with.
Sure. I know that every project in some way or another has its own fair share of challenges or difficult situations or anything like that. So did this run into anything like that, and how'd you deal with it?
Yeah, sure. We filmed this in 2021 after, it was originally scheduled in 2020, and then 2020 happened. So we shot in summer of 2021 when COVID was less of an issue, but, only because there were elements in place to deal with it. So filming during COVID, sure, very difficult. A lot of protocols that we had to go through that were difficult logistically. Hats off to those departments for handling it like champions. Hats off to cast and crew for being willing to deal with what were oftentimes, very disruptive, sort of protocols. But honestly, if I had to pick one thing that was difficult, it was the fact that this is a movie with actors, namely Arnold Vosloo, James Urbaniak, and Bruce Davison, and Al Pagano and Corinne Brady. They all have it, but they're actors who don't speak a word of German. And we do not have a single goofy, give me the bomb German accent in this entire movie. Anything that's spoken in German is spoken in German. And that was very challenging. So Al Pagano had to learn, entire shouting monologues in German, having never spoke a word of German in his life. Corinne Brady had to do the exact same thing. And the real challenge, we were able to at least kind of break some of those up. The really, really big one that terrified me since the moment I wrote the script is this big scene in the third act where you have this near farcical discussion of Nazi ideology that sort of precedes one of the big plot twists in the movie. And you have Bruce Davison, the Academy Award nominee, in the room. You have James Urbaniak in the room, the Office and Venture Brothers star, and then you have Arnold Vosloo in the room. And none of these guys speak German, and they do this entire scene talking very, very sort of complex archaeological language and political language with all these references and sort of political variants and just these different expressions. And the entire thing is in German. And when you try to shoot, it's notorious in filmmaking that shooting a scene of a bunch of people around a table is extremely difficult. Well, add to that a bunch of actors who could, at any moment, if one of them, misses a line, you can't just improv that because you don't speak German. You have to nail every line, every word, every beat, or the entire thing goes to hell. And credit to these guys. They came in, all three of them, with actor Torsten Keller, who is a native German speaker and was able to sort of, be the hub that all the spokes fastened onto to sort of give them that orientation, and came through and did the entire scene from top to bottom without fail, without break. And it just made it the easiest thing in the world in the editing room. So that was really, honestly, it turned into one of the easiest things on set, but it was actually by design one of the most difficult, one of the most complex things in the entire movie. And I'm beyond excited about the results. It's actually my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, that was I do remember that scene, and I had a lot of fun with that. You spoke about COVID and the stuff going on behind there. And I had a question about the timeline specifically, like how long did it take to make, first of all? And did you have a strict schedule that you were trying to abide by the entire time, or was it just more lax?
Yeah, no. So we started shooting in late July of 2021. We knocked it out, and we did 3 weeks of production, and then we had a couple-week break, and then had a fourth week. And then there was, one or two minor little pickup things that were B-roll that didn't actually involve actors. But everything was on a very tight timetable. We were following Screen Actors Guild's regulations and their protocol for COVID safety the entire way through. One of which was shorter shooting days. Mathematically, the less you shoot, less likely somebody is to catch COVID. So I think they recommended 10-hour shooting days. And anybody that's been on a film set knows, you're often shooting 14, 15, 16 hours. So there was, I think, one day where we went over 10 hours, and the rest of them we clocked at 10. And that was all credit to the preparation by everybody, knowing what the stakes were going into this, knowing it was going to be enormously difficult to keep everybody safe while at the same time being as productive and efficient as possible. And, we had scenes where, those B-17 scenes at the beginning with the crashed plane, you want to be out there at magic hour, which means everybody's setting up out there in the dark. By the time we got everybody through, the antigen test and the PCR test at the top of the day and processed and moved from, zone C down at the hotel to zone B at base camp and zone A over at, these regimented areas to try to prevent cross contamination. All of a sudden the sun's been up for an hour, and it's like, oh my God, we lost the best part of the day to shoot. And, there's a lot of existential terror that goes into that. And, wondering if you're going to be able to, Arnold Vosloo can't just, hang out for an extra 3 days. It doesn't work like that. And so it gets scary. It gets scary real fast. But, again, all credit to the team, from the COVID safety supervisor on down to the health safety supervisor, on down to department keys that knew what the stakes were, down to actors that didn't complain about wearing masks. I mean, everybody handled it like true champions, true professionals. And it could have tanked the production, but we sailed right through it.
And you did a good job. What's something that you would, if you have any tips, do you have any tips for anybody who's an aspiring filmmaker just starting out in the business, what to look out for and anything like that?
I would say come at it from the story side first. Whatever your aspirations are to, if you're starting at a low level, you got to produce your own stuff. You got to write your own stuff. You got to direct your own stuff, unless you just have cash to splash to pay somebody to do it. And I would say that all starts out with story work. And I would say, go read some books about age-old storytelling. Go find out what the very foundational structure of narrative is. And then I'd say take the earbuds out, take the headphones off, get used to never wearing them, because every time you go out in public, you want to hear how people talk. Get used to constantly listening to people talk. Learn how they speak, learn how they engage. Honestly, that's the number one flaw to me in bad movies. Got nothing to do with production value. On the indie side, it's always shitty writing. And it almost always is shitty because am I allowed to swear on this? Is that like,
go for it?
Okay. I'll back up. Shitty writing, shitty dialogue. Those are the absolute worst things about indie movies to me. And I oftentimes wonder if it's because people haven't been around and engaged and immersed listening to people talk for long enough to be able to hear real, truthful conversations emerging in their head as they go to write these characters and build out screenplays. So yeah, I would say come into it from a story perspective, handle the story before you think about anything else, build it from the ground up. And in order to do that, back up one step further, learn how people talk. That's the number one thing.
Fantastic. I only have one more question for you. And I feel like it's more of a fun question. I feel like people like to know what directors like to watch at home. So what is your favorite personal favorite movie, rather?
Oh man, I can never answer that question. Let me throw a couple at you. I love Tropic Thunder. I laugh my ass off every time I watch Tropic Thunder. It's one of the funniest movies of all time to me. I think part of it is being in the industry. You sort of get all the inside jokes, and it's extra funny. The movie that made me want to get into writing movies was The Revenant, which was the movie that Leonardo DiCaprio won his first Oscar for. One of the best movies I've ever seen. I've watched it. It's one of the only movies I've watched 4 or 5 times in theaters. Absolutely wonderful movie. I love The Departed. That was a phenomenal movie. What else? I love the True Grit remake. That was absolutely wonderful. Love Inglourious Bastards. I don't know. I can keep going down. There's 5. That's 5 off the top of my head. I'm sure I'll add one later, but we'll leave it at those for now.
Yeah, and Glorious Bastards is one of my favorites as far as, war movies go, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely.
But yes, that's all the questions that I have for you today.
Sweet. Awesome.
I appreciate you taking your time. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting this started,
No
but I
worries.
appreciate your patience with that.
Hey, not a problem.
And yeah, it was good having you. And until next time.